The period of 1150 through 800 BCE is commonly known as the Greek Dark Age. This age was marked with depopulation, poverty, backwardness, and was overall just very isolated from the rest of the world. A lack of access to resources was the main reason for all of the poverty. In 800 BCE, Phoenician ships began to visit the Aegean Sea, and soon Greek ships began exploring the Mediterranean in search of raw materials, trade opportunities, and fertile farmland. This time period of about 800 BCE to 480 BCE is known as the Archaic period. Advancements depended on seaborne trade because of the lack of fertile land in mountainous Greece. In 8th century BCE, there was a huge population increase, in large part due to farming replacing herding lifestyles. A polis is a Greek term for a city-state with an urban center and all the agricultural territory under its control surrounding the city center. In 7th century in Greece, hoplite warfare became very prominent, in large part due to jealousy between city-states. Greek infantrymen that were mainly comprised of middle and upper-class citizens were superior to all other military forces at the time. From 750 to 550 BCE, there was much colonization along northern Aegean Sea, the Black Sea, Libyan coast of North Africa, southern Italy, and the island of Sicily. Tyrants took over city-states and weakened the old elite by taking advantage of the disaffection of the emerging middle class, which in turn contributed to the evolution of democracy. Sparta and Athens were the two strongest city-states. However, Sparta progressed towards a military oligarchy, while Athens moved towards a democracy. Pericles was the leader that guided Athens to full democracy for all male citizens and pursued imperial expansion, prompting the Peloponnesian War. However, during the Persian War, Persia attacked Greece twice around 490 BCE, but Greece won within 20 years. The trireme was an Athenian warship that implemented Greek and Phoenician technologies of the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. This helped bring much power and wealth to Athens. Piraeus became the most prosperous port of the eastern Mediterranean belonging to Athens. The Peloponnesian War took place between 431 through 404 BCE. This was as a result of Athenian imperialism, but Sparta won because of Athenian heirs and financial support from the Persians. Afterwards, Philip II made Macedonia into a military power and forcibly united the Greek city-states. Alexander the Great conquered the whole Persian Empire and went all the way to the Indus River Valley and spread Greek culture throughout the city-states that were formed and conquered. The Hellenistic Age took place between 323 to 30 BCE. This was when Greek culture spread across Western Asia and northeastern Africa. After Alexander the Great died in 323 BCE, Greece territory split into three parts: the Ptolemaic, Antigonid, and the Seleucid kingdoms. The Ptolemies were located in Egypt with a capital at Alexandria, whose economy was centrally planned and easily controlled because most people were farmers along the Nile River. Also, huge libraries and museums fostered research in science, technology, and medicine, among other things, in Ptolemies. Alexandria was named after, obviously, Alexander the Great, and contained 500,000 people. It was also located along the Mediterranean coast of Egypt.
Greek political and cultural evolution began in the 8th century BCE. Political evolution was interrupted by internal warfare in the 5th century BCE, but cultural evolution continued with little break into the Hellenistic period. In the period immediately after 800 BCE, Greek political structure centered on the city-state, a regional government centered in a major city but including the agricultural hinterland. City-states varied in territory and population. When Greeks colonized other regions of the eastern Mediterranean, they carried the distinctive city-state form of government with them. The city-state format made political centralization in Greek virtually impossible, but it did encourage active participation in local government. In the early states of city-state development, land-owning aristocrats were most powerful. Although city-state constitutions varied, democracy tended to become more common by the 5th century. Athens was the chief example of democratic government. Athens had passed from aristocratic dominance through civil dispute to tyranny under Pisistratus. After the tyrant's death, the reformer Cleisthenes reestablished a council elected by all citizens that prepared an agenda for an assembly of all citizens of the city-state. As the Greek economy became more commercialized, the society became more diverse and hierarchic. The mountainous geography of Greece produced a greater reliance on trade and colonizations than in India or China. Frequent war produced a greater dependence on slavery and reduced emphasis on improved manufacturing technology. Greek society remained dominated by an aristocratic landowning elite. Greek politics and art was largely aristocratic in tone. The ancient Greeks believed that man was just a victim of the whims and follies of the many gods who fought, loved, and jealously vied for power up on Mount Olympus. Worship was not a private affair in ancient Hellas. It was the concern of the whole community. The gods were honored at an open altar in ceremonies that had been handed down for generations. Prayers and hymns were said, choruses were sung, and sacrifices of meat and wine were offered. The gods were also honored in special festivals, of which the Great Olympic Games were the most famous. The worship of the gods was part of one's civil duty. Atheism was not really non-belief to the ancient Greeks. It was non-participation. Because religion and worship were so much an affair of state, and participation in religious festivals and games was a responsibility as well as an honor, private feelings had little room for expression. In time, the mystery religions arose to fill this need. The person who wished to belong to the religion took part in a sacred procession and sacrifice in great secrecy, participated in the enactment of a highly emotional ritual performance in which his feelings were aroused and swept up, sometimes through drink, drugs, and intense dancing. Men and women, freemen and slaves, were allowed of the mystery religions. The Greek had many social significances to the world. One of the main ones was women's right and differences. Depending on different polis, women were treated very differently. In Sparta, women were much more spoken than anywhere else. They were still inferior to men in the government and personal rights, but were listened to and respected. In Athens, they were treated almost like children. They were given no power in politics and very little legal protection. They were only allowed outside the house during religious rituals and funerals, but otherwise they stayed at home to watch the children of servants. The Greeks also applied much technology into the world. The trireme were Greeks' warships. The Athenians used them in their navy, which was the strongest in Greece. It was a fast sleep boat that was powered by many rowers. The Athenian rowers were able to reach speeds up to 7 knots and perform many strategic maneuvers. The warship was the reason why the Athenians were able to win the Peloponnesian War. The Greek culture also lived on to influence many other nations and colonies. One of today's example is the Olympics. Much of the Greek literature and art was adopted by the Romans and became popular once again in Europe during the Renaissance. Even today, many of the Greek philosophers' theories and beliefs are still being studied, including Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The Athenian culture was the one most adopted by other nations because of the democratic and intellectual culture.
Greece mainland is a peninsula with many islands further south into seas. Isthmus links Peloponnesus to the rest of Greece. 75% of Greece is mountainous, small amounts of land where civilization can be developed. Most cities that came about in the 7th and 8th centuries grew independently from their neighbors. Being split up amongst many islands makes unity even more difficult. Promoted city-states that quarreled amongst each other, but unified in large battles, mainly against the Persians. City-states had similar cultures, but identified themselves as separate Athenians or Spartans, for example. The mountainous region also made agriculture difficult, along with land that wasn't fertile. When Greece began to grow, they began to focus on cash crops such as olives and olive oil. They used colonial lands with different geography to grow crops such as wheat. Having close to no rivers, transportation and trade within Greece was difficult. Another feature of Greece's geography gave them an advantage in trade. Being close and nearly surrounded by the Mediterranean, Ionian, and Aegean seas, transport was made cheap and easy by being skilled sailors. Ocean served as a military feat by using their navy to defend themselves from the Persians. Climate of mild weathers and hot summers promoted outdoor activities such as athletics. At the decline of the Mycenaeans between 1200 and 750 BCE, there were no kept written records. Greek culture eventually started to advance by learning by the Phoenicians. Around 800 BCE, the Greeks adapted the alphabet to become the one that we use today.
On the island of Crete, nearly 1,000 years after the emergence of the Egyptian civilization, ancient Greece began. Polytheism became key in worship due to gods affecting the status of the earth. The culturally advancing time of ancient Greece promoted the creation and wide usage of westernization. Modern sciences such as architecture, art, and astronomy were viewed from the basis of Greece's discovery and knowledge. Philosophies and philosophers and modern-day politics are based off the Greeks' premier Western foundations, such as the city-state. Nearly all modern-day nations in the world have adopted the characteristics of Greek culture and civilization, such as humanism, reason, advancements in art, and fair civil cases.
Ancient Greece lasted during the Archaic period from 8th to 6th centuries BC, followed by the early Middle Ages. Classical Greece, flourishing between the times of 5th and 4th centuries BC, began with the retreat of Persian invasion by Athenian leadership. Classical Greece is known mostly for its culture,